I think it's nuance is so important. It's not just about like, hey, let's let gamification onto everything we can find and then land our hands on, because that's just probably not going to work out. I think, we looked at it like from having, I think, four distinct, I guess, qualities of consumer spaces where we see, is there kind of a motivation from the consumer that is, complementary to entertainment? And maybe that's education, and maybe that's wanting to improve your relationship with your partner, or your spiritual wellness, or your financial wellness. But those are powerful motivators in addition to obviously being entertained and learning how to build a habit. We look for things that are as much as possible inherently social. We know from gaming, the best gaming products that retain are social. Like there's some sort of social play, whether it's co-op or competitive, or you can basically play in a group together. Those kind of things provide a really strong foundation for some of those social design and features that we can take from gaming and apply into new spaces. And it's not that.
Phylicia Co. is a general partner at Play Ventures, a global early-stage VC fund that started in gaming and has expanded into what she calls playable apps, products that borrow the engagement mechanics of games and apply them to categories like financial wellness, spiritual life, and even relationship health. In this conversation, we talk about what actually makes something playable and why slapping gamification onto a product rarely works. We also dig into early retention signals, why paid user acquisition isn't something founders should fear, and what she really wants to see it precede. If you're building a consumer product, especially one that depends on engagement, habit formation, or social behavior, there are lessons here worth paying attention to. I'm Walter Thompson. This is Fund, Build, Scale. Fund, Build, Scale is for anyone who's interested in learning the basic skills required to launch a startup, secure initial funding, and transform their idea into a sustainable business. Get the newsletter on Beehive or LinkedIn, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a rating or review. Phylicia, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me, Walter. I'm really excited to chat today.
So before we get into your investment thesis, I want to start with a little context for listeners.
Sure.
So for people who don't know Play Ventures, how do you describe the firm's focus today?
Yeah, sure. So I think today Play identifies as a gaming and also a consumer VC fund. Our roots are in gaming, and it will always be, I think, an investment area for us. Our founding partners, Henrik and Hari, were gaming entrepreneurs, right? And they started their own businesses and sold them to Disney and to King, respectively. And that's really how we got our roots as a VC fund, investing in gaming startups, gaming adjacent technology as well, which could be ad tech, which could have been payments, anything where gaming clients are typically early adopters, beachhead clients, but really has the potential to expand outwards. And I think with our latest fund, we've kind of evolved our investment focus a little bit, expanded like what it means to be play ventures and what it means to play. And we also looked at it and thought, gaming is a mature market these days. So, um, you know, where else, if we think that gaming is the OS for engagement and monetization, where can all those learning skill sets that amazing gaming founders have go to next? And I think it was a response to both what we saw in the market that was maturing, and also what we saw with founders. Some of the best founders, were maybe getting on the rodeo again and like getting on the horse again and going back out there and doing it a second or a third time. And they were, also choosing to kind of take their learnings and apply it into new spaces and consumer kind of blue ocean areas that they felt, hey, these aren't things that have never been experienced before. Some of these questions about how do you keep consumers coming back, how do you create a novel experience, how do you create new habits, right? These were all things that we know how to do from gaming, and we can apply them into kind of these new spaces. And so we intentionally expanded into what we call playable apps, which is building on the belief that you can use gaming expertise to drive high retention, high LTV products that are really engaging, and applying the science of games into a whole new generation of consumer products. And for us, when we look at, hey, what are some of these spaces that we can apply gaming too. It's again, I think it's nuance is so important. It's not just about like, hey, let's let gamification onto everything we can find and land our hands on. Because that's just probably not going to work out. I think, we looked at it like from having, I think, four distinct, I guess, qualities of consumer spaces where we see is there kind of a motivation from the consumer that is, complementary to entertainment? And maybe that's education, and maybe that's wanting to improve your relationship with your partner or your spiritual wellness or your financial wellness. But those are powerful motivators in addition to obviously being entertained and learning how to build a habit. We look for things that are as much as possible inherently social. We know from gaming, the best gaming products that retain are social. Like there's some sort of social play, whether it's co-op or competitive, or you can basically play in a group together. Those kind of things provide a really strong foundation for some of those social design and features that we can take from gaming and apply into new spaces. And it's not then trying to fit like a square peg in a round hole, right? You're not trying to shoehorn social in. It's already social. And so those are some things that we look for. And then also, is there a controllable outcome? That's what we look for, right? Like
Mhm.
if you put in effort, are you going to be able to achieve success by and large? Obviously, within gaming, you want to have some variability. That's what keeps things fun. But you also don't want to go completely off spectrum where, hey, this is a place where effort does not always equal success. So like if you're trying to apply gamification to fertility, I probably would steer clear of that. That's probably not something I want to touch. And so, those are kind of like some of the filters through which we think, is this really a space where gaming, know-how, and science can really be applied to great success?
What stage do you typically invest, and what does a typical first check look like? What's the range?
We typically invest from pre-seed to Series A. I would say our sweet spot, the stages that we prefer to come in at will be definitely pre-seed and seed. We love to lead. We've co-led as well. We're not, I guess we're not egotistical in that sense. Like, if there's a great co-lead, especially somebody that we've co-led with before, or somebody who's value add, especially as we've moved into playable apps, right? Like we're not saying we know everything. I think we definitely bring a value add as a gaming investor. So if there's somebody who is a great co-lead, we're always happy to kind of do that. I think what we're interested in is really working with founders and supporting founders in their journey to build great outcomes. And so, kind of like putting your ego aside a little bit.
For a founder who might want to talk to you about, the thing they're working on, do they need to be like a gaming founder who has an idea for something else in health tech or fintech, or could they be someone who has deep domain expertise in fintech who could maybe put a layer of gamification on top of the service or product they're offering?
Like I think most of the founders that we honestly speak to, because of our gaming roots, they're naturally gaming founders, who are looking to build perhaps in new spaces. But increasingly, we're also talking to founders who are maybe domain experts in different areas, and then kind of looking to do that. To bring in somebody who is, a gaming investor who can value add in that way. And I would say like both, we'd love to chat to founders from both directions, to be honest with you. I think it's really more less about like, hey, are you a gaming founder? Check the box. Right?
Right.
But when we kind of, I think, have that first conversation, we like to spend a lot of time with founders talking about like, okay, so why this opportunity? Like, what do you think of it? What do you know of it? How are you thinking about it differently? And really kind of aligning with them on their vision. And so, I've invested in, for example, a company that makes an app called Bible Chat. And, Lara and Maris are incredible founders. They didn't really come from necessarily the gaming space, but they came from experience building consumer apps before. But when we spoke to them, I think they'd done their homework. They had an idea of like, this is what I want to take from gaming. This is what I don't know, and this is what I know, and this is what I want to learn more of. And we were very aligned with them on some of the ideas of how there were these transferable skills and practices within gaming that we could apply into Bible chat to make it engaging, to make it like the digital church for 2 billion Christians across the globe. And obviously, we know that a lot of this is like hypothesis. This is like seed stage companies. So like, I always say that, everything is a hypothesis and we'll look at the data. The data will tell us and the users will tell us if we're on the right track or not. And sometimes, that's the thing also about building free to play games, right? It's, you don't kind of launch a perfect product right out the gate. You launch it, you try to keep it simple, and then you iterate. And game design is iterative and free to play. Even in designing or balancing a game economy, you don't get it right the first time round.
Mhm.
You launch it, you iterate it, and so I think kind of like taking those approaches and principles and applying them into kind of what these new consumer founders are building as well. That's something that we look for, and whether we're kind of aligned on the direction. And sometimes like we might agree with you that, hey, this is a really exciting space and exciting opportunity, but maybe there's stuff that we kind of just don't see eye to eye on go to market and how you're thinking, how you want to build the product, how you want to build the business. And that's okay too, to not be 100% aligned, but I think you kind of want to have some agreement there and like, that we agree this is a good direction before you have like an early stage investor on board.
And finally, when a founder does reach out, what's the best way to get your attention? And what do you wish more founders understood about how you like to be pitched?
Um, you know, I'm available, like we're available on every platform. So we get things from everywhere. We get emails, cold emails, LinkedIn messages. But honestly, probably the best way to get to the top of the list is like through a warm intro from obviously another founder or maybe even another investor as well. Like that's probably going to get, to the top of the inbox. Otherwise, like I've got probably like 600 emails in my inbox, and many of them I know I'm overdue in replying. I wish
Yeah,
I could clone myself, but
my inbox is a trash fire, so I couldn't possibly judge you.
yeah, I know. And then I'm also on Telegram, right? And my partner looked at my Telegram the other day. He was like, this is disgusting. You need to do better. I was like, I know the inbox is bad, the Telegram is bad, the LinkedIn messages are bad. I know I need to do better. But yeah, like warm intros are definitely, I think, the easiest way to kind of get to the top of the list. Um, what I wish more founders I guess knew about pitching to us. I think, sometimes you see first time founders and you meet first time founders and they spent like, let's say you have a half an hour call booked, just like as an intro call and they'll spend 25 minutes kind of running you through the slides. And that's like probably, I think not the best way to do it, to be honest with you. I think the best pitches are always conversations, like send us the material beforehand. You might think that the slides that you have is like, God's gift to, I don't know, startups and venture. The odds are we've probably seen similar pitches
Mhm.
before. And actually just having those materials beforehand gives us the opportunity to actually have like a deeper conversation about like, hey, why do you think this? And you mentioned this, but like, can we talk about how you think about the roadmap and what assumptions there are here and how do you think about go to market? And then we can actually really have a conversation. And I think it's a great way also then for founders to have um, a two-way kind of assessment rather than us kind of asking you really basic check the box because I need to be able to fill in my CRM about what we've talked about here and what the deal
Mhm.
is about. Like it's a great way I think to assess if an investor how an investor is thinking about things and how they're looking at the information you're giving them and what kind of questions they're asking, because let's say this is an investor that leads you around or participates, like there's somebody that you have on the board. Like I think those conversations are a great way to assess how would you have those conversations if they're on your board. This is somebody that you want to work with. Do you like the way that they're thinking and asking questions, even if you don't maybe like the questions that they're asking? So yeah, I think that that's something that I would suggest to founders. Like, don't spend that 25-minute running through the slides.
Yeah,
Um, Keep it conversational.
definitely. Always share that deck a few days beforehand just to make sure you
Yeah,
just look at.
ideally, yes, 100%.
How early do you want to get in? Like pre customer, pre prototype? Can they just have wireframes? What do they need to show you that the team and the idea is not as risky as it might be.
Yeah, I think we love to come in at pre-seed. Like that's the truth of it. I think it's kind of changed in terms of what we wanted to see. I think the truth is that the cost and hurdle to create an MVP, right, and to test out your hypothesis has become much lower than it used to be before. And it's really interesting to see that in like there is even a slight difference, I would say, in free to play gaming and consumer products, right? Because I think it's easier to scope the consumer product typically, and to figure out, okay, can I build an MVP of this in like 2 weekends, right, with my co-founder here, and it's just the two of us and AI and maybe a little bit of vibe coding or Copilot or something like that. And I know this is not robust, but I can ship it out and I can test because I know I'm addressing a particular pain point, and is somebody going to pay that? It's a little bit harder to scope that within a game. The simplest kind of free to play the casual game would be a little bit probably hard to scope within and ship out in 2 weekends. Um, but so even at the pre-seed stage, I think, we love seeing founders who just like, I'm gonna build this with or without you, right? And I have such belief in this business and opportunity that I'm gonna do it. And it's not, oftentimes it's an MVP. Like it's rough. The truth is, it's rough. I know sometimes founders are like, if you ask them, like, is there a prototype? Can I try it? And they're kind of like, it's rough. And, but like we're pre seed founders. We've seen things that are like literally squares and rectangles,
Right. You're like
you know,
doctors. You're like doctors. You've seen it
moving
all.
around on a
Nothing can
map.
embarrass
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Basically, like a doctor. Yeah. And it's like, what we want to see here is just kind of what have you put together? Can you ship? Because shipping is hard. People often underestimate how hard it is to ship. So if you ship something, like honestly, you're probably kind of above the cut on a lot of people out there, right? And it also just shows us like how much, I guess, hustle and belief you have in this. Can you put something together, even if it's rough? That just kind of shows us something. It used to be perhaps that even like if you talk about 5 years ago, right? It used to be like, well, no, we don't have anything yet because we kind of need funding and we need a team of 10 in order to ship something. And that's kind of changed. And so it's not so much I need to see a polished prototype or an MVP, but I just the fact that I see something tells me that you're going to build this come what may. And it's, I guess, that resilience because God knows that a founder's path is going to be so, so difficult. And if you're willing to, I mean, part of my French, but like eat shit, right? And like really, it's going to be difficult, but you can push through those tough times. I think that's a great indicator of just like founder resilience and hunger and drive to ship something and build something.
What are the signals that tell you at that really early stage that the founder actually understands, retention and engagement on a base level instead of just kind of borrowing that gaming language as a framework?
Yeah, I think for us, if I compare gaming and let's say playable apps, um, like with gaming, it's pretty clear what the metrics are. We're looking for your classic end day retention. Yes, you don't have a full polished product, so we're looking at early day one, day three retention if you have it. We're looking at how much people keep coming back. I think that's the baseline for it. Um, Sometimes we see, and it's a little bit of a yellow flag when they start kind of presenting what we call kind of massaged retention numbers, or like we've seen it slice and dice in many different ways where the most common one is like, hey, let me present rolling retention. It's like, well, you could, but like, are you trying to build a daily habit product here or in a game that people come back to? If that's the case, then using that really doesn't make any sense. And it tells me either you don't know what you're looking for in terms of metrics, or you're trying to obfuscate something. And I don't kind of know which one is worse, right? Um, and with playable apps, I guess it's a little bit different because maybe you're not building a product that you want people to check in with every day. um, Maybe what you're gunning for at the initial stages is like a weekly product, so that's fine. Like you're gonna adjust kind of like your numbers accordingly. And that makes sense. I think it's all about for us, like, do you understand how consumers or players are engaging with your product and how they should be engaging with your product, and measuring, basically indexing, like, do you have traction? Do you have product market fit based on the appropriate metric? And I think what we often see people do is like they'll give you, a nice big blended average, like, hey, my day one is like 60%. You're like, wow, that's amazing. And then you go in there and you're like, can you give me the cohorted retention? I really want to understand what that looks like from a cohort to cohort basis, because the odds are anybody who shipped your product knows that you will have a cohort that's amazing and golden. And then it's like, you never achieve that high again. I
Mhm.
remember when I was a kid, I was like 7 years old, and I, I did amazing on a math test. I was like 99 out of 100. I was really proud of myself. My mom, being an Asian mom, she was like, what happened to that one point? Like, what? And you know what? I never achieved that high again. That was like a mathematical career high. But like, golden cohorts are kind of the same, right? Like you achieve that amazing result. That doesn't mean that that's what you're seeing on every cohort basis. And sometimes we'll meet founders who are like, oh, either they don't want to show that to you, or they just don't know how to present it. And either, again, it's like kind of an either case. It's like, okay, both are not great indicators. It just kind of tells me like it's a cherry picked number. And so that's not really naturally like reflective of where you are.
Mhm.
Even though of course, congratulations on the golden cohort, but a business does not, you know, get built on a golden cohort.
Shifting into tactical takeaways, I suppose, like in that kind of pre-seed, uh, really early stage, what's a good practical exercise a founder could take to kind of test for engagement for their playable app before they approach you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like, shipping your product out, and not just shipping it to friends and family, is always a good way to test um whether there's really demand out there, and is somebody going to pay for your product. I think when it comes to playable apps, that's what we see a lot of. And it's the same reasons, it's the same thing as like go beyond the friends and family. They're great as like, hey, let's figure out bugs, let's figure out UX. But the best indication of whether you have traction at a consumer market here for your product is, start running some paid UA, right? I think some investors are scared of paid and performance marketing. Um, I think that's less of a thing that I think us as gaming VCs are afraid of. Realistically, if you're going to scale a product to massive venture scale, you're going to need to use, paid user acquisition, and you're going to need to know how to wield that as a weapon, essentially. So, acquire users, and make sure it's a meaningful cohort. It doesn't really do anything if like you're getting 30 installs a day. But if you're getting 300, 400 installs a day, and you can really show and track, like, are people staying? Are they opening the app? Are they playing? Are they at least coming back the next day? Number one, that's great. Number two is like, even better, are they monetizing? Will they pay for it? And we've seen founders do and try different things. Like we've seen, for example, Aria is a couple intimacy platform. The idea behind it is kind of how can they apply, some of these game design learnings to helping people with their relationships, right? Keep the fun alive and keep it interesting, and through a mix of both like online content as well as offline play. And one of the things that I remember being so impressed by when I invested in them, they had just honestly a Typeform MVP, which is honestly probably as no code as you get, right? But they were acquiring users. A significant amount were organic, some came through paid channels. They were converting them. People were paying for this. And so even though it was janky, it was rough, it was hype form, I myself was shocked. So I was like, people are paying you. They go through this type of flow and they actually convert. But that's like a great validation of like, hey, people will pay. And if people will pay, you have a business.
Mhm.
You don't just have something that people like to use, you do have a business. In gaming, it works a little bit differently. Typically, with it when it's free to play, perhaps monetization data only comes towards the later stages, not quite in the early stages. So there, we'd index a little bit more on like, retention data, early retention data. But in the case of playable apps and consumer apps, we often see, people just testing it out. And even if it's like a rough subscription, let's try it, right? And people pay, like that's again a great indicator. Yeah, and that's something that I think it's interesting. I also think founders should be less afraid to kind of piss off their users, especially at such an early stage. And I say that just
So what does
because
that look
I
like? Is
think
that are we talking about more than just like design changes or price hikes or what is that? How does that manifest?
it's the fact that look, like whether you're looking at games or whether you're looking at playable apps and consumer apps, like if you're going in a really crowded space, right? Let's say dating apps, for example, like we constantly see pitches for essentially tiny little innovations on the existing offerings out there. So fundamentally, you're still talking about swipe left or swipe right, right? With a tiny little bit of innovation out there. And the question is like, is that really enough? It's a pretty crowded and competitive market, right? So, if you're really going to disrupt this category, you got to disrupt it. Like, it can't just be like a 20%, 10% step change. And you need to turn that thing on its head. And one of the things that I've seen, for example, in the Chinese dating app, I think the Chinese are pretty aggressive in things, and but in a really interesting way. There's lessons there. Um, I've seen this Chinese dating app where they get pretty up close and personal with the questions that they ask you. Even for me, I'm like I went through it just to test it out, and I was like, "Well, this is very invasive." Like imagine a dating app kind of asking you like, "Do you live with your parents?" Because that can be common in Asia. Do you own your house or do you rent? How big is your house? What car do you drive? How much do you earn? Like really specific questions. And I remember thinking this is so invasive. But I also remember thinking I don't think I've seen a Western dating app ever do that, right?
Mhm.
And it was the idea of like, well, they're trying to get match made, they're trying to find their partner. Um, Realistically, and especially perhaps in their culture, these things do matter.
Yeah.
So if it's invasive, yes, and you risk kind of pissing off your user, so to speak. But yeah,
And
I
maybe
mean,
in this case, maybe more friction the better, possibly.
but maybe the more friction, the better. In this case, I'm not saying it's always the case, but I guess it's like that's an example of them going about it in a more aggressive, different way, which the consumer might not be used to, but depending on the market and segment you're going for, perhaps you need to be so disruptive and kind of think about it from a completely different point of view. Um, and anyway, I thought that was a really interesting kind of approach. I probably would not do it 100% the same way if you were targeting a Western consumer market, but I definitely thought there were lessons there to be taken.
How do founders and apps generally come across your radar? Like, are you looking at, like the ratings on app stores or like like the leaderboards? How do they catch your notice initially?
I think, at least for me personally, it's it's a mix of just kind of for us being hypothesis driven and sometimes just also just being really um I guess lateral thinkers and exploratory in how we think about things. So some of the things for example that I've invested in um were things that honestly I was kind of pulling strings and just kind of constantly asking like yeah, I observed this but why, right? And just kind of being curious and then developing a thesis around it and going out to look for, hey, I wonder what's out there. Because it's that thing, it's like if somebody has a good idea, I guarantee you somebody else around the world has that idea too. And if they're builders, they're probably building something around it. So with for example Bible chat, I was raised Catholic, right? So um for me, I always struggled just with the way the faith was practiced. I just thought there must be a better way to do this, especially in a modern kind of context. And I also thought, well, Christianity is it's a faith that's 2,000 years old, and if I kind of look at it from a retention basis, I'd say it's done pretty darn well. So that's that's like a good foundation. It's pretty
Matured, sure.
social. Yeah, it's very social, right? People go to church, they go to Bible study, there's prayer groups and stuff like that. So I was like, that's a pretty good foundation. And so I started looking around and seeing, wonder what people are building out there and looked up the charts in App Magic and was like, oh, look at this little app called Bible Chat. Like, look at it go. It's starting to take off. It's very early. And so I reached out to the founders. I wonder what that's about. Tried it, downloaded the app and pinged them and managed to get introduced to the founders. We started chatting again, realized like great kind of, I think, alignment, and we felt like we could really value add. And so we invested in that. And then with Alinea, I think the wealth gap was something that I was interested in. I think particularly as, I'm a woman, right? And I was just thinking about it like, yeah, you know what? Me and my girlfriends, we don't really talk about investing. It's just not something that we talk about. We talk about everything under the sun. But talking about what you do with your money, it's
Mhm.
like not really something. And I kind of also knew like just from the numbers, I know that women just generally do tend to invest less. We're great consumer spenders. We dictate a lot of like household spending. What do we spend on, or our own spending? But when it comes to so-called spending, I guess in investment products, it's something that we under-index on. And so I started doing my research, reading books about it, talking to people in the financial investment space about it. And I don't know, maybe TikTok just figured out from my algorithm that I was really interested in this. I started seeing ads for or organic content from the Alinea founders, and so kind of reached out, and so like yeah, I would say TikTok brought me to Alinea. But yeah, I love kind of pulling on these strings and observing things in the world, and then kind of asking like, but why, or seeing what's changing in the world. How are how are Gen Zs and Gen Alphas going to spend their time? Like that's something I've asked myself. Like I have two nephews, 7 and 9. Um, they're on the iPad. They don't have phones. But kind of thinking around like we all like I'm on an iPhone, but this iPhone product is what 15, 20, anyway, 20 years old now. Like when my nephews come of age and they're in their teen years, like are they going to want to use an Apple product, or is that going to be kind of like grandma's phone? So like if that's the case, then what's the next kind of form factor? I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's always interesting to think laterally and kind of explore all these things and ask like why and what if and what if I change this and how would somebody do things differently? And I think that leads to really interesting veins of thinking. I'm not saying everything translates into an investment opportunity, but I think it's just personally what works for me, I suppose.
What kind of founder or idea would you want to back that doesn't exist yet? Is there a sector you're looking to, get into, or something, a use case that you've just kind of haven't seen yet that you'd like to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. Today I was just thinking about it, like when I was speaking to somebody, I think we're seeing a lot of, change in consumer internet and what people, kind of, or how people discover content and how people look for things. And it used to be like yeah, for so long it was let's go Google something, right? It was so common, it became part of the lexicon. I rarely use Google these days because I'm just on like I'm on Perplexity, I'm on ChatGPT, I'm using those things, right? And I'm getting really more personalized, I guess, recommendations on it. And like Chrome used to be in my browser, now I've completely replaced it with comment from Perplexity, and I'm trying all the other browsers as well. And I think the point is where the ad network's going to come from, because I'm 100% sure advertising is going to be part of the equation, and how we interact with, the LLMs. I'm sure there is, and then I think it's interesting to think about what that might look like. I don't know. It's just an early thought. I literally had it at lunch today. That's fresh off the press, I would say. But yeah, there are other things as well that I think about. Like I look at, companion girlfriend, boyfriends, and that are AI powered, obviously. And I know that's very divisive. And for me, I always just thought it was a funny novelty kind of thing. But I'm looking at um, kind of like the demographic breakdowns, the societies and studies, and you see massive kind of sex ratio imbalances in certain societies, like in China and India, where you have about maybe on average 35 million excess males, right? In each society, and that's a real issue that you can't solve just by like, um, you know, a generation or two. It probably takes about 30 to 50 years for that gender that imbalance to be balanced again. So what that probably means realistically is that you'll have a lot of single people who can't who are unable to just find partners and who probably will still want to have that emotional intimacy from someplace. And so it could such agentic, I guess, partners and companionship be a solution to it. It's certainly not a perfect solution. In a perfect world, you will be balanced and everybody will be able to find their partner. But we live in an imperfect world, and maybe because I'm Singaporean, I'm extremely practical. I look at this and I think, yeah, I always like to strive for the ideal and the fantasy, but I prefer to deal with the reality that we have, and that is the reality we have. And it's not something that you can fix in 20 years or 30 years. It's probably going to take more like 30 to 50. What's going to happen to society in 30 to 50 years when you have such big imbalances? It's a scary thing to think about. And so that's also something I'm thinking about. Like, I know there's a lot of conversation about like, is this ethical? Is this ideal? But life is about dealing with imperfection.
Phylicia, this has been a really great conversation, super tactical, really wide ranging. I feel like a listener would have a really good idea as far as what you're looking for and maybe how to pitch it.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
The Fund Build Scale theme was written by Michael Tritter and performed by Michael and Carlos Chairez. Michael also composed Ocean, the track you heard at the top. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and leave a rating. It helps more people find the show. You can get the Fund Build Scale newsletter on Beehive, follow along on Instagram, and if you have a guest suggestion or a question, reach me at fundbuildscale@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Fund Build Scale is a production of Truth and Soul Media, LLC.